How has your honorary stewardship of the White House grounds been coming along, Mr. President?
Marvelously well, Mr. President. Marvelously well. You know that we pull her up a thingy? The one you got for me and the boys. It is a bee's knees.
That's great, Mr. President. I'm glad you like it.
Some of the boys found a rodent nest under the hydrangea. I signed an executive order to put that rodent nest on the kill list. It's been taken care of, Mr. President.
But, wait a minute, Mr. President. An executive order can only be signed by the sitting president. That's me, Mr. President.
Oops. I forgot myself, Mr. President. But you know what I mean, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President. Actually, I do not know what you mean. What do you mean?
I misspoke, Mr. President. Look how well the huckleberry is doing. We only planted it last week.
I'm not big on huckleberry, Mr. President. In fact, I hate it.
Well, now, did someone say kill list?
Listen, Mr. President. For the love of God. I can't even hear my own thoughts.
That makes two of us. I also cannot hear your own thoughts, Mr. President.
Whose stupid idea was it to put a tennis court in the middle of the White House lawn? Isn't there a dawn to dusk curfew? Those clowns were out there well past dusk. They kept me up half the night with their idiot squealing. One of them kept shouting, "Booyah," every time he got the ball over the net. Booyah. 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 What the hell is that? He thinks he's Arthur Ashe all of a sudden? It really was very inconsiderate. The First Lady was tossing and turning. I had to go sleep on the couch.
Well, Mr. President, we kinda thought that a tennis court would liven things up a bit.
But, you promised me that you were going to put a second rose garden there, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I beg your pardon. I never promised you a rose garden.
Mr. President. I remember it as though it were during somebody's last campaign, also known as yesterday. It was right after I vetoed the congressional bill to make huckleberry the national plant. You were spraying the blueberry bush with some kind of organic spritz, and I pointed to that spot and said, "Mr. President, wouldn't a second rose garden look very fetching over there?" And then you nodded in the affirmative, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I am sorry I do not recall that. I have no record of that, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, I distinctly remember walking on the lawn and coming upon you chopping down all the cherry trees. And I said, "What in the blazes is going on here, Mr. President?" And you said, "Mr. President, I was going to surprise you with some kudzu."
I will have one of my aides look into it, Mr. President. In the meantime, I have issued a directive. We are going to rip out all of the English ivy running along the fence on the east lawn, and to replace it with rows of beach roses and myrtle.
Myrtle? You mean vinca, Mr. President?
Myrtle, vinca, what's the difference, Mr. President? They will look lovely along the gravel path in the moonlight after we install the new solar footlights.
Solar. Solar doesn't work. Don't you know anything? Oh, forget about it. Who are those idiots over there on the tennis court, anyway? They can't even get a decent volley going. My grandmother could play better than that.
I think they're from the tennis racket lobby, Mr. President. But they may just be from the rackets. Of course, they could just be some random people who wandered in from Pennsylvania Avenue.
They aren't even wearing tennis whites. Have we no national standards, Mr. President?
I will set up a bipartisan commission to look into that, Mr. President.
Screw the bipartisan commission, Mr. President. I am exercising my pocket veto. Get those trespassers the hell out of here.
But they're only in the second set, Mr. President. We should at least let them finish the game. The score is low 40.
Mr. President, I don't have time for this. Just get it done. There is another matter I need to discuss with you. It is of the highest national urgency. The Vice President was over here this morning with a visiting delegation of Japanese horticulturalists, and he made a few off-the-cuff remarks about how the grass is so much greener at the official Vice President's residence. And he kept pestering me about fertilizer and lime. You've got to know when to apply the fertilizer, and when to apply the lime, he kept saying like a broken record, all the while winking at the Japanese horticulturalists. Then he pointed out a few bald patches near the lilacs. It was all very humiliating. Then he started going off on some bizarre tangent that I just could not follow. He was all over the map. The translator had a hard time keeping up. I thought she was going to keel over from exhaustion. I pushed the code red button on my tie clip and the Secret Service came and escorted him to some made-up meeting with the Campfire Girls so he could give an impromptu lecture about butterflies.
Mr. President, the bald patches near the lilacs are a failure of policy. We simply must do better, Mr. President.
What about the mole problem? We keep raising the threat level, then lowering it, then raising it again. Are we winning the war on moles, or what, Mr. President?
We certainly are, Mr. President. We have located and isolated the Mole Command and Control Center.
And what is the strategy there, Mr. President?
If you come with me around back, you can watch the operations from a secure location. We have piled a ton of dirt on top of the molehill, blocking all of their supply routes, Mr. President.
Mr. President, you mean you have made a mountain out of a molehill?
But of course, Mr. President. This is Washington.
Mr. President, I have got to get back to the cabinet meeting about topiary. But before I do, I need to review one more issue with you. Are geese droppings in your portfolio, Mr. President?
Geese droppings, Mr. President. Of course, Mr. President. Those come under our jurisdiction. Why do you ask?
Mr. President, we received a number of complaints after the last Easter egg hunt. Some of the children sent us their dry cleaning bills. The late-night comics are having a field day. And the New York Times is obsessed with it. They run almost as many articles about it as they do about European soccer teams that nobody here has ever heard of. It has become a growing scandal. They are calling it Waddlegate.
Waddlegate. Good one.
Recommendations?
Well, Mr. President, geese naturally make a honking sound when they fly overhead.
So what?
Well, Mr. President, whenever you hear the geese coming, you should run out to the White House lawn. Next, you should start honking. Try to persuade the geese to fly over to the Capitol.
You want me to run outside and start honking like a goose, Mr. President?
Well, that gets proven results, Mr. President.
Mr. President, that sounds ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, Mr. President. I agree. But the White House is traditionally dumped all over Congress. And it is a hell of a lot better than walking like a duck. And talking like a duck. Look, Mr. President, you like to run, do you not?
Yes.
And you like to honk, do you not?
I guess so.
Well, then, Mr. President, put the two of them together, and what have you got?
Honk if you like honking.
Thank you, Mr. President.